Hello everybody. I'm just going to put a little bit of water on the top here, on the top 1/3 more or less, straight across. We're using the Hake brush, and I've pre-mixed a number of colors, and I don't know yet which ones I'm going to use, so I've mixed more than I really need. But I'm going to start with a little bit of cobalt blue, and I'm just going to put some of that here in the mix, and in the water rather. And I'm going to basically move the paint around. I have also some quinacridone rose, and I'm going to put some of that in here. Both very transparent colors, and so I'm just going to move that paint around a little bit. And then tilt my board and see how some of that mixes. I don't usually put a paper doggy pad on my table, but I've got some colors today that I'm thinking of using that are pretty dark and could make quite a mess. So down here I'm putting a little bit of quinacridone yellow. Okay. I've mixed way more color than I need, but the nice thing about it, in these little delicatessen containers, little plastic containers, that instead of throwing them away, you can recycle them. And when you're done, and the paint is dried in the container, you just can stack them all up. There's a space between them, and they stack up pretty nicely. They're meant to be stacked up in these delicatessens in restaurants when they're, got tall stacks of them, and then they put whatever it is you order in them and serve that. I'm going to put a little more cobalt blue in here, and I'm going to bring some of the quinacridone rose over here. I'm going to spray that a little bit and tilt. And then I can dab the white areas to improve the way that they look potentially as clouds. But this is the beginning. And I think these colors will play well with what I'm hoping to do in the base with earth colors and some dark silhouetted trees. the rose and the cobalt blue combine to make a very nice violet. I'm going to put a little more rose up here. And I think I'll put a little more rose down along the horizon. Let's see how that diffuses and blends. I'm going to use a smaller, mistier spray bottle. The other one's droplets are a little too big to get. This one is by Holbein. It's made specially for this kind of work, and it puts out a very fine mist. The other one is very nice to use, but the droplets are a little bit bigger, and sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want to have bigger droplets. So now I'm going to try to just with my paper towel, I'm going to lift some color here and there, and hopefully get some shapes that could look like clouds. It's always so strange in some ways when you paint and you put color down, you do all the work to put color down, and then you do all the work to remove color. But it's part of the process. And some small amount of the color does stay there on the paper. But still, there isn't any, I mean, one could just paint with a very, very watery mixture, and minimize any wasting of paint. But the process of making these washes and having them mixed together of their own often creates such a beautiful effect that it does take a little bit of more paint use. I'm going to put a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of very watery quinacridone pink. I'm going to water it way down. I think I want a little more, really going to water it way down. I just want a little more of that over here. Yeah, I think that's probably a good amount, enough to have it carried over, but not all the way. I'd like to leave some of that yellow area without the rose in it at the base. I'm going to wet my paper towel a little bit and see what happens here, if I can remove a little more color softly with a wet paper towel rather than a dry one. That will leave some, because it's wet, the color on the side of it will diffuse back into the area that's just been wetted. Let's see here, get a clean edge, soft, and go down into this yellow area a bit, make that a little lower. I think that's not bad. Let's see here. Do a little more here, up here, just softly. The thing about skies is to try as much as possible to have the watercolor paint itself and mix in a kind of magical way. Let's see if I can make that diffuse just a little more. Make sure there are no hard edges. I like the way it's mixing. I love the cobalt blue is a lovely color, and even though I'm not using in the sky any granulating colors, I have a lot of granulating colors mixed for the ground, but I don't have any for the sky. I'm just using these quinacridone rose, quinacridone yellow, and cobalt blue, all of which are very transparent versions of those three colors. So there's a little bit of lightness there, but I'm concerned that if I try to put any color in, it might be too obvious. So let's see here if I can do that without making it. Yeah, it did make a bloom. It would. That would be. It was foolish of me to do that. Let me spray a little bit from above so that it moves down and hopefully then evens out. If I hold it like this for a while, once the paper begins to buckle and raise because it's wet, there, I think it's starting. Hard to fix things like that. It's a minor issue, but yeah. I think that will probably dry fine. Good. So I have all these colors mixed. I'm not sure about the foreground, but I'm thinking that I will use a number of earth tones that granulate and paint some trees that will come up and have the light showing through from this sky. I don't know if I need to make that sky area a little bigger. What I could do is take some more water and take a very watered down version of the quinacridone yellow. So I'll take some of that and put it on the plate. Put lots of water in it. And by making a very soft, transparent version of that, then I can decide later exactly where I want the horizon line. Because any of the earth colors that are put in later can go right over that yellow, and it'll look like just the light is slightly showing through the color of the earth, or reflecting on the color of the earth. So I'm just going to do that in order to avoid having to think about right now where the horizon will be. I just let some of that diffuse down, and then softly clean that edge so that there's no hard edge and it blends through. And with no hard edge, it makes it very easy to decide later where I might want that. If I were putting water there and making a water scene, I might not want to do that, because then the blue of the water might look green. I'm going to put a little touch of the rose madder in that mix, and again, more water. So that there's that kind of sunset color. And same thing, I'm just doing it very light. And we can decide later where the edge of the horizon will be. But that way it really looks like the transition of a sunset. Very nice. So this will need to dry completely, and I don't even know if I'll have to work those clouds with my paintbrush to make shadows on them. I probably will have to do that, make shadows on the clouds so that their shape is more defined. But right now they're looking pretty cloud-like. So the paint has cooperated to help make that work out. Okay. So that's the beginning of this. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll come back after it's all dry and work on a very earthy colored foreground. I have mixed together some wonderful colors that I'm planning to use this time, which are the lunar earth and lunar red rock. These are two colors made by Daniel Smith that have a high amount of granulation, and so they will really work well in the ground. I've also mixed together some crystal-based colors. One is garnet, and the other is burnt bronzite, and then let's see, what's this one? Oh, piemontite. Those three, I'll show them to you. They're made from ground crystals. This is the garnet. That was the piemontite. And this is the burnt bronzite. And so I'll use those colors. I also have mixed together another earth-based ground-up color, and this is Sedona rock from the very precious Sedona Desert. So those colors I'm hoping to use in the foreground with some lighter, normal, transparent colors. So let's hope that this color combination will work. It's a pretty bright sky for a very earthy base, but we'll take one step at a time. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you a bit later. I've lightly sketched in a wetland scene, and it begins in the back here with some autumn foliage in the back, and I'll drop a little bit of the quinacridone gold into that. And then as we move forward, I'm going to put a little bit of that Verona gold in the next bank of foliage. And again, put a little bit of the quinacridone gold in there. As it comes forward, it does get a little bit more color in it. So I'll drop a little bit of the Sedona in. This is a bank of trees with some foliage that is in the early autumn, so it's, you know, it's not in full brightness, but it's kind of turning. But I'm not going to worry about that. I'm mostly going to worry about my color scheme and having it be soft. So I'm going to go forward a little bit more. And again, I'm going to put in a little bit more of the quinacridone gold in that. And just drop it in. And a little of the Sedona. But it's a little more intense this time. And I'll put a little bit of that garnet crystal based paint in it, just here and there. I'm just wanting to show, without a lot of detail, this is from a photograph from a friend of mine, but I just want to show that the transition of the trees as they move forward in this wetland. So put a little bit of new gamboge in here. And I've got all these colors mixed, as I showed you before, and not knowing which ones I would use, but I just wanted them ready so that I could use them quickly. And this is a little bit of the new gamboge, but a little less color in it, just to have a transition. And let's some Indian, actually, some Indian yellow. I'll put a little bit of Indian yellow. And some of the Sedona. Sometimes when I paint with the crystal-based paints, I do it in part for the color and the granulation that some of these crystals impart, but I also do it, I use these paints sometimes just because I want to enjoy working with the crystals and the energy that they have and the energy that they bring. This is garnet into a painting and hold in the painting because their energy is made from stone, or in some of the cases it's made from soil, but stone anyway, because soil also is broken up stone. So the energy is just held in that stone forever and can really impart a certain feeling to the painting. I'm going to go also now on this side and do something harmonious on that side again. Some new gamboge. I think it's a good color that goes with the yellow and the, put a little bit in there. And I'll bring in again a little bit of the Sedona. The Sedona color is a little bit like a red ochre, or looks a little bit like a red ochre. I think it's a very brick-like color. Not quite a burnt sienna, but something like that. But anyway, it's because it's made out of ground up Sedona stone. It has its own character. And as I move a little forward into the next group of trees, I'm going to drop in some of that garnet, which I'll show you. It has a very reddish, like a Bordeaux kind of color. And I'm just dropping this color in loosely so that it makes its own texture. And I can have it blend a little bit, but basically moving the board a little bit because it is very rough paper, and if the paint moves around a little bit, some of the paint will settle down into the crevices of the paper and to make a texture. So, and then I'll do one more. I'll use the little new gamboge again on this bigger tree that's here. And I'll put some water in here, keeping my water a little bit separate from the color, the tree behind. Okay, I use a little bigger brush, and I'll take a little bit of the quinacridone gold, which has lately become a little, I don't know why, the colors become a little harder to get a hold of. So I'm not sure what's going on with the supply of that. And I'll go right to the garnet. I think I'll skip the Sedona for this one and go right to the garnet. I don't want to overdo it in terms of dark, but this is a closer tree, and it is actually a pretty dark tree. And in much the same way, I'm going to put the gamboge over here. And I think I'll go right to the garnet and drop that in. In many ways, this wasn't my intention, because I wanted to have colors that would go with the sky, but it isn't happening. But I think I'll be able to do some things that will make it work. Okay. Now this is a wetland with a lot of grasses coming up. So I'm going to have use the ochre. This is called Verona Gold Ochre. I'm just going to put some of that color lightly to indicate the tops of those grasses. Now this one here should be light. It's further back, and it should be lighter. And these grasses just step down. I'll just begin to show them over here. And also there'll be grasses over here. And for the most part, the rest is water. Wetland water with some grass in it, but mostly water. So I'll have a little bit of reflection of the sky in that water. And again, this is the Verona Gold. I'm just loosely putting that on here. I'm going to let that dry. And then we'll decide how much detail to put into these various things. Over here in this color area, I want to put in a little bit of this, it's called raw umber violet. And I want to put a little bit of that in while the paint is still wet. And on the same on this side. That is not a crystal-based paint. That's just a normal paint, like the new Gamboge that I was using, and also the Indian Yellow and the quinacridone Gold. Those were all your normal paints, but not crystal-based. But the colors of the ones that are crystal-based are actually the colors of the ground stone. Just the ground stone put into some media so that it, watercolor media. Okay, that's the same way they would have made it many, many years ago when they didn't have manufactured paints. But they had to make their own. But Daniel Smith makes this wonderful line of these crystal-based paints. They're called primatek paints by Daniel Smith. Okay, I think the best thing at this point is to let this dry and look at it before doing anything more. Okay. Hope you enjoyed that. I've lifted a little color out of the tops of these trees, and the reason I've done that is that I want to put some of that sky color into that mix, and I'm going to bring in the rose madder with a tiny bit of the cobalt blue. Now it's, to some extent you could say, well, you're just going to make mud. Yeah, I'm making a little bit of a brown, hopefully not mud, but I want to drop that in to harmonize to some extent the tops of the trees with the color there in the sky that are actually being reflected by the leaves. So it's not unusual for some of that color to be captured. So I'm going to just do that, and hopefully that will work, at least in these darker areas. I think it will work even in the lighter ones. So let's see how that does. Yeah, I think that's working for me. So I'm just going to bring that in each of these areas, and they'll in the areas that are lighter, it'll be lighter because the area underneath is lighter. And the tree groupings that are darker, like this one is very light, so I expect the color will be much lighter because I'll use a little water here to transition it, because it will reflect that this is a lighter area. but still some of that color will show through. Do the same thing over here. At least in the tops of these tree areas. Yeah, I think that brings in a little more harmony to those groups of trees as they move down into that far area within this wetland. And yet we can still see what's going on below. And what's nice from my point of view is that I'm going to take a little bit of color out, is that the crystal-based paints are still there underneath, and that energy will always stay in the painting. My daughter used to hold a monthly crystal group, and every month we would meet and learn about a new crystal, and then wear that crystal for the rest of the month, and then share with each other what we thought we felt by having that crystal on us and in our lives. It was really interesting how each stone is so different and brings with it a completely different feeling. And in ancient times, of course, stones were worn by some royalty to show their power, by some religious leaders to show their, to enhance their spiritual connection. And in Native Americans, stones were used also for healing, and in other cultures too. So I think it's really great. I'm thrilled to be able to work with crystal-based paints here in the United States that are available here. Okay. I think that's working pretty well. And then there'll be a little bit of this color in the water area. I'll put some of that in now, as long as I've got the color mixed there. See how it looks. I'm putting just water first. I'm just going to drop a little bit of that in. There was already some yellow that had been brought down from the sky, so I'll just drop in some of this, and some of that yellow will still show through. Leave some of it white. Okay, so even though that did seem like such a weird color combination, I think it's starting to come together and could be very interesting. So we'll let this all dry and come back to it tomorrow. It's midnight here, so we'll do that and take a look at it in the daylight. See you then. Good morning. I like the colors pretty well. It was a bold move to put these very opposite colors next to each other, with the violet and the blue. But what I'm doing is softening some edges with my little scrubber brush. It can be done with any kind of bristle brush, but this one works very nicely. So just want to soften the edges a little bit. I wanted to see how it was if I had a very bold image with harder edges, and as I looked at it I thought, no, they're not really what I'm wanting here. So just softening that and letting some of these colors even blend a little together. Just so ever so lightly, so that there's no damage to the paper, and it's subtle. It's as if the light is coming through the edges of the trees and softening the edges of the trees. So there's two ways to have done it. I could have painted it that way by just using very little water on the edges and making the edge soft from the beginning, but anyway, I tried this technique this time and it worked for me. That's because I didn't use any staining colors. If you use staining colors in your mixtures and then you go to try to scrub like this so ever so lightly and just lift a little color, you can't really do it. Like if I had used some alizarin crimson in the mix or some phthalo blue or phthalo green, there are a number of colors that are staining colors, and they're beautiful. But one has to be careful when to use them. You want to use them when you're quite sure that you're going to put that color in and it's going to stay and you're not going to change it. Okay, so I'm just softening edges, and then I'll come in and paint the reeds that are standing up in the marsh after that's done. Well, I've taken that mixture of, remember I had made a mixture of cobalt blue and rose madder, and that was in the sky. And then I put some of that into the trees to blend that. And just now I've taken some of the garnet, which is this color here, and I've mixed them together. And I think it will be a good base for me starting the work on the reeds. I'm going to start the work on the reeds with a fair amount of water in the one corner of that mixture. And you remember that the garnet is this color here that I mixed. Looks like a Bordeaux wine. So I'm just going to, with a thin mixture, the reeds stand up tall, and they're above water at the top, and the top is very lit by the light But then on the sides of the reeds, which I'm having trouble seeing my pencil marks here, but on the sides of the reeds, you can see them standing tall in the marsh. So I thought what I would do is just start with a thin wash of that tall, of the sides of the reeds above the water. And then I can always put in some marks as details later. Okay. And as the reeds, of course, as they get further and further away, the marks are narrower and narrower. And with a little bit of detailing, and as it gets closer, I'm making it closer and further away from the sun on the horizon, making it a little bit stronger in color. And that will be sort of compatible with the stronger color of the trees in the shadow back here. Fortunately, I have a very good detailed sets of photographs from several wetlands, one along the Hudson by a friend of mine who took those photographs in Cold Spring, and then another, I have quite a few in the Adirondacks on a lake and in some of the wetlands there. So altogether, I think that we can make this work. And this little bit here is not going to be so much reeds, but just bank coming out. And I'll just put a little bit of dirt edge, and maybe we'll put some stones in there on the side. There's quite a lot of like fallen trees, fallen bushes, some grasses. And over here I will put grasses on this whole bank here, and there won't be much of I don't want to put too much detail in here right now, just a little bit of side scumbling, because this will be an area where there'll be a lot of marks will be brought in. Okay, so that's not, I like that. I hope you're enjoying this process. You know, I don't hesitate to pull color out if it turns out something isn't working. So I'm just trying to decide over here how much of this will be reeds sticking up, and just, I think over here mostly just some grasses and bank coming up to the tree here, rather than the reeds. And while I've got that color at the base of the trees, back here I'm going to put a little bit of that color here and there at the base of the trees. That'll unify it together with what's in front. And these basically indicate shadows under the foliage. And there'll be some marks there. I need to blend that in with a little bit of water, but I like to harmonize the color a little bit with the use of it in the reeds. So Often at the base of the trees you'll see this kind of shadows under the foliage, and then we'll put in some marks for tree trunks. There's a lot of trees here. The same over here. Some areas will be more in shadow than others. Others will be lighter. The main thing is just not to make it too much of a big clump of dark. I'm just going to put a little bit of water and on the edges here and soften those edges there. Okay. Same up here. I'm going to soften the edges a little bit here. Okay, there. There'll be the slightest amount of shadow over here. Just very light, very transparent, watered down color. Here. Make this a little more strong since it's quite a distance in front. There. And over here it'll be strongest. The tree is closest, there'll be a strong shadow under the tree. And there'll be some shadows separating some of the trees. Back here, some shadows. Okay. While it's wet in places, I'll put in a little more color. The garnet is really beautiful color, isn't it? I wouldn't normally mix it with the cobalt and rose madder, but with that strong sky that is such a different color, I need to bring some harmony into this painting of the foreground with the background. The sky. Yep. I have to lift some of that color there. Need to lift a little more of that color. Good. Down near the water, I'm going to use a smaller brush, a rigger, and just put in a small brush. Put in some darker version of the color, the same color, just less water. Down near the base, near the water. Bring some lines up. don't really plan my paintings. I mean, sometimes I do, but when I do these washes, I just like to go with whatever seems to materialize from the initial washes, and then try to come up with an image that will go along with them. Yeah. I think that's a reasonable start for me. I'm going to try out a very thin version of the color, watered down, just to show that there's these reed beds come out and there is some separation between them as the water flows in and out of the wetland. So I'm going to put a few little shadows here and there to separate them. Okay. I think for now I'm going to let that dry, and I'll just look at it and think about it. With watercolor, you have to have a lot of patience. You just, or at least I do. Everybody's different. And then, of course, the more you paint, the more sure your stroke is, and maybe you don't have to think about it. And then there are people that do the same kind of subjects all the time, and so they know exactly how they're going to approach that. I'm always changing my subjects. I paint horses, flowers, landscapes, portraits. You know, I like to try painting different things all the time. I feel like I get bored otherwise. But you get more of an identity, of course, if you paint the same sort of things all the time. And then you can paint faster too, because you just know exactly. If you only paint landscapes, then you know exactly what you're going to do. I think this is coming together rather nicely. I just enjoy the play with the color, you know, and seeing what it does. It's so beautiful. Watercolor is so beautiful and has a mind of its own. I think I'll put one little tiny bit of a shadow over here. Yep. A little tiny bit over here. Okay, I think that's good for now. After that dries, I can come in and put in some individual edging leaves and some individual marks on the trees. And then after those are done, I'll put in some marks on the grasses. I have to work this part first next time, just because I need a place to put my hand where there's dry paint in the front. And so I'll put my marks here without worrying about spreading the water around with my hand. And then I'll come in and work from the top down in here. The last thing I will tackle, well, the next to last thing will be the water. Putting some sky color in the water, making just a little bit of marks in the water, a little bit of grass in the water. And then this part here, grasses. That'll be in the foreground, and those should be the very last thing that I do. And I haven't quite decided how bold I'll make those grasses. They can be subtle or they can be very, very powerful. So we'll wait and see. I hope you're enjoying the process. Well, I've prepared a little bit of rose madder, which you have seen before, this color here, with a bit of the quinacridone gold, and mix them together until I get a color that I think works in the context of the painting, bringing out the color of the trees and a little bit of the sky. And I thought I would do some dry brush on the top of these reeds. To simulate the texture of the grasses coming up. It's a little bit too much there, but just very lightly. Just put your brush in the paint, just the tip. It's a dry brush. Okay. And it's not a bad idea to test it on a paper so that you know that you don't have too much water in it. So I'm just going to dry brush over the surface of the tops of these reeds, leaving quite a bit of the yellow in there, but getting a sense of the texture there. And that way, that will be enough detail actually. And then using the same color, but a fine brush, I'm going to bring in a little, let's see if this works. It's a little too light, so I need more color in there. So I'm going to add more of the garnet. I'll add more of this raw umber violet. Okay. And then with a fine point brush, I'm just going to put in some marks to indicate those grasses standing up. So there's already a sense of the color in there, and this will give a little bit of detail. Again, I might come in with a slightly darker color and add a little more detail here and there. So my intention is not to show all of then I'll put some little dots of more in between shadows down at the base. It doesn't have to be continuous, it's better if it's not. It should be like here or there, here and there. Leaving some spaces and letting the eye fill in the blanks, basically. But enough detail so that the viewer has a sense of what's here. And I'll approach the whole tree area in much the same way. Looks like I got a little color there. Just to clean it. I'll just bring a little bit of this color here into the bank. I'm still not sure how I'll approach the bank here, but I'll make some little marks that just begin to indicate there's a bank there. Oops, a little too much color, but it'll dry a little later. Some interesting marks is the best way to approach this, I think. Everybody's different on how they do things, but interesting marks are so important. You know, there's the rhythm and a feeling for these kind of marks that are the difference of excitement in some way. I think that you know, marks like this of different color create a bit of an excitement in the painting. Okay, so that's a start. I'll put that aside. These colors might be useful a little later, but these two sets of colors aside. And I'll take some of this, again, this umber, just directly on its own for a little bit of accent. Here and there, and it's still not quite, I don't know if it's dark enough. Here and there along the base of the I'm just going to make a few marks because since they're sitting in the water, make a few water type of marks around the reeds. Just increase the depth of that shadow in a few places here and there between the reeds. While I have that brush and put some of those marks there. Start to show some grasses on the bank with that darker color. And this is just to be easy and loose. And a few stray grasses popping in different places here and there. Coming into the water, just here and there, so that again breaks it up, and it's that little bit of not being too regular is important. And here and there, some grasses just popping up. makes it a little more natural scene. I'm certainly likely to do more of those. But while I've got the color here on and the brush, just do a bit here and there. And over here too, might as well. The beginning of some colors here and there. It's a beautiful color. This raw umber violet is a gorgeous color. I've had it in my box of tubes of paint for quite a while now, but I have really used it very little, and I can't believe that I haven't used it more because it's gorgeous. I think you can see how rich that color is. Okay, so at this point, I will do a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of grasses coming out here, coming out of the water here, just a bit. Okay, I think that's all I can do now without rubbing my hand, and then I'll use some of this color to come back in and do some color, and maybe some of the others to come in and do the under here, just to give you a flavor of it, using this darker color. Come back into some of these areas and create some marks that indicate the various bushes and shadows between them. And probably some branches here and there. And some trunks maybe. I can't really work on this except here a little bit from the side, but that gives you an idea of it. I think I will wind up doing some of those marks off camera, but because they'll just take quite a long time to do them. But let me just do a tiny bit over here so you can see the basic approach. I'll probably use this rigger. It's a Princeton rigger. Has a very nice long, I think you can see the edge of that there. Let me make some room for my hand. I'll just have some marks here and there indicating trees. I won't do so many of them in the background, but in these closer areas I'll do more. Branches showing through in the foliage like that, and maybe some coming up very thin. There's always some trees, some older trees that don't have leaves on them up on the top. And you see those. So there's a little more stem in here, maybe a stem in here, a bigger one. Just popping through the foliage. Could even be one dead tree right here in the front. Might do that. I might make it one continuous tree that doesn't have foliage on it. And in the other places it'll be just a few branches here and there showing through. Shouldn't make those too dark. A little more water and some other marks coming through also. With a little more water, I think that will work a little better. Yeah, that's working a little better. So there's just a hint of the trees here and there. Take some water and diffuse it a bit. And a little more shadow in here. At the edge of the trees there are always some broken branches and things sticking up. Little saplings and things like that. Make this one a little bigger. So if we do some of this in the foreground, trees, then we'll just put a tiniest amount of that kind of thing in the next ones. And more similar over here, a little bigger trees, because it's a little, well, it's not really closer, but it's a little bigger, taller tree there. Okay, so that's the idea. And going further back would be just exactly the same now that this is dry here. You know, just a lot of water and a little bit of marking, but much lighter here and there and less of it. Just a little detail. You can hear the thunder. We've had quite a big thunderstorm this morning. It shook the whole house. One big crash. It came boom, kaboom, and everything shook in the house. Now it's just a little bit of thunder. The storm is very minimal now, just a little bit of drizzle now. But all of a sudden there was like this big boom and pouring rain. And yeah, I think I need one more fine line in here somewhere. Maybe I'll just continue this one here a little bit. Yeah. And here there's very little that's darker. It's very light and thin. Okay. Almost nothing here. Nothing, very little. Alright, so I'll do the other side the same way. Here, very, very, very little. Very, very, very little, just transparent color. Same color, just more water, less detail. A little more water, just even adding some water, just some water to diffuse that a bit. This will be even a little more than what I want. Okay. So that foliage is starting to come together very nicely, I think. Maybe a tiny bit over here. To be careful not to overdo this. And I'm just going to put some water in over here and dab that a little bit because it's could be put in too much depth there. I'll just dab that, make it lighter. Over here the same thing. Just water and dab it to make it a little lighter. Okay. Yeah. So the dry brush on the top of the reeds. I don't think I'll come back and do much more detail in these reeds. I think there might be a few tiny places of a bit more depth of color. Maybe even use a little Payne's gray, a tiny bit, just to get a little bit of depth of color. I might throw in here and there a little bit of alizarin crimson just to give it a little pop. Okay, I'll do this one off camera, but it'll be the same like this. And then we'll come back and finish grasses here and whatever final touches on the water, if any. Hope you're enjoying that. I think I can zoom in a little bit, maybe, and give you a little better idea of some of the detail. I'll pull. Color is really quite beautiful. Bringing in that rose madder and garnet and blue that is in the sky above. I think was a bit risky at first, but it seems to be working. So I'm just holding it up, trying to be steady with my hands. And you can see the nice combination of the cobalt blue and rose madder in the water. Okay, we'll come back and deal with this foreground later. Take care. Okay, I told you I would put more detail into the trees over here, and I've done that. And I decided to bring in a little tree, two trees here. I'm using the color now, I was using the color called, it's hard to pronounce, let me see. Where is it? Pimandite. Yeah. Pimandite. It's another crystal-based color. It's a little darker than the garnet and it's actually more of a wine color than the garnet is. And so I brought a little bit of that color into some detail here, and some of the little darker tree shapes in here. And I put a little bit in the grasses here, just here and there. And the same over here. Put some darker, so that darker color aside from the garnet. And then I took a very watery part of that color and used it to create these shadows, or the reflections, whatever you want to call it. I guess they're reflections, because reflections always come down to the viewer, but they're, in a way, they're also shadows, because this is these reeds are backlit by the sunset over there. So I just pulled down some shadows here and there, and reflections. And here you have some, I put some grasses in, and when I put in those grasses, I also put their very light reflections on the water. And often reflections are a little longer than the item itself, stretched down. And then I put them I decided to put these trees here so that I could have some nice, these are kind of dead trees because the water has kind of, you know, maybe, anyway, oftentimes in the wetlands you'll see trees that have died, and because maybe they got too much water or whatever. So I put those in so that I could have a couple of nice reflections, and that would really clarify this reflection also, and some of these others, clarify the reflection of the trees on the water there. Okay, so the next step is this body of soil there. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my, I'm going to try a little bit of my lunar earth color and scumble in that area with the side of the brush. So you just I put some of the lunar earth, which is a Daniel Smith color that is granulated, and scumble so that some of the texture of the ground shows through. And some of this was also ground and not reed over here, so I'll put some of that over there. And as I get closer to the viewer, I'll make that a little darker by putting in some of the garnet, mixing that in there with it, mixing some garnet in there. And again, I'm just going to put my brush in on the side. This is a nice synthetic brush, and look, you just scumble, and it goes over the little knobs in the rough paper. That way I'm not going in and getting into the valleys of the paper, but just going over the side. Similar to the dry brush, but a little more strong. And then once I have that and it's dried, then I'll put some calligraphic marks in there. And let me use that same color over in this area. Okay, I think you can see the side. Yes, you can. Put it over here and scumble over here. Again, this is an easy way to start the process. See how, and I'm just using the mixture that the darker mixture, because this is closer and I want it to be stronger color. So it's a mixture of the garnet and the lunar earth. More of that. And there's just enough variation of the colors in here. They're all in the same family. They have a bit of red and yellow tone in them, but they're in the same family, so they're all going together very well. And I'm just, as I said, just going on the side so that this is called scumbling. And it works very well with rough paper. Dry brush you can do on hot press smooth paper as well as rough paper. But I think I'll take a little bit of this and just carry it over here on the surface of this. Just a little bit. And I'll put some water in here because there should be a bit of shadow over here. So I don't want too much shadow, but I do want a little bit of shadow over here. I might use that over here and put a little bit of shadow over here too. And I'm just approaching it a bit in the same way here and there. Okay, I'll put a little bit there. And I'll make the shadow a little more pronounced over here. But still scumbling to let the color show through. Now after that's dry, then I'll continue in here with the kind of calligraphic marks with the rigor of my grasses and maybe make some strong grasses over here. Okay, but that has to dry first. I think this is turning out to be a nice painting. I was a little bit afraid it was going to be a big mess when I put that, put all those yellows and oranges and earthy colors under that bright sky. But it seems like it's working. One of the things I have to do though, let me do that. Let me get some clean water. I have another bucket here. This is a time where I can really mess up when I get too excited. So let me take my cobalt blue and some very clean water and a clean plate and take some cobalt blue and just have the slightest amount of color in the right places of the water. Reflecting a little bit that sky. Just a tiny bit. I have yellow under there, so I have to be careful that I'm not making green. I'm going to carry a few little lines here, a few little water lines. I've got an area here with a little bit of paint that seems to have gotten there that shouldn't have. So let me just try to clean that. And also a little here before I go any further. Okay, with the cobalt. So let me just take that color. And I have a little bit of that blue sky coming down here in a few places. Not too much because a lot of it is the cobalt, and I like the way it looks. And it's kind of I've got a couple little marks there in the paper I'll have to remove. There's a little more of that cobalt over in this area, so I'll just put a little bit. That cobalt blue indicating the sky color. Do it right over those reflections because they're dry now. It's where it's very helpful to just be careful about letting some areas dry before you come back in. But I need to leave some white areas, so I have to be careful about that. But I'll put some right over the cobalt, the rose madder. And so just like it is in the sky, there's a little bit of that violet that was created by the two colors mixing. I think that's about it. If I do anything more, it'll be too much. But it's just enough to really indicate the relationship between the bit of blue in the sky and the carry a little bit into this shadow area here. I think that makes some sense relative to where it is in the sky. A little bit in this shadow area, so that we're sure that this is still water down here. Yeah, that's working. Going right over the shadow. Good. Of the trees on the water. So that part is done. The water, I think the water is done. I could put a few more little swiggle marks. It sometimes happens, but I don't know if I really want to do that. I don't know. No. No, big mistake. Not enough water in that little bit. So I'm just going to put a few water movement lines here and there. Soften them if I need to with some water. I'm using the cobalt blue for that. You get a little more water movement right around the obstacles, so I'll just put in a little bit of indication of that. It's very light, very subtle, so it should be okay. Put a little bit in the foreground here with some water to soften it. I think that's enough. Don't need to do any more on that. Okay. I'm going to let this dry a bit so that I don't make a mess with my hands while I'm trying to work on the grasses. So we'll leave it to sit for a while and settle down. It's almost done. Hello again. I put a little bit, I'll zoom in just to show you. Well, it's not very visible, but I put a tiny amount of blue, cobalt blue, up in the cloud areas, in some places to define shadows in the shape of the clouds. Very watered down amount of cobalt blue. Just with the tip of my number 6 synthetic round by Escoda. Just like that. Just a little bit of gentle, with some water, blending it in to make sure that the clouds have a little bit of shape to them and are not just a great big white space, empty space there. So it depended, on how I approached the foreground, but since I have put so much detail into the foreground, I think it balances the painting out to have a little bit of that same kind of detail showing up in the clouds, just a little bit here and there. Drawing out the shape of them. There. Okay. So I'll zoom back out again. I think you can see some of that. And this area here I said I would work on. So for this area here, I'm going to take my small Hake brush. Some people call it Hake. I don't know. I don't really like the name Hake, so I'll call it Hake. Hake. And it is the Ron Ronson line from Cheap Joe's. Ron Ronson was a wonderful, wonderful watercolor artist who did some great books, really worth looking at his books on skies and on watercolor painting. I think he has 3 or 4. And in 2016, he passed away, I think at the age of 93. Wonderful, wonderful man. But this is his line, his Hake brush line. He has different sizes. This is the smallest size he has. And for this space over here, I think I like it. So I'm just putting the color, which is some of that lunar earth color with a little bit of the garnet in it, but not too dark. And so I'm just putting some of that on my brush, and I'm hoping that I have good success here. So this is going right over the scumbling, putting some marks that are like grass-like marks, with the end of the brush, the tip of the brush. Now I'm going to go into a darker color, this one here. It's not quite dark enough for what I'm liking. I think I'm going to have to go into some of the, put some of the raw umber violet, just really quite nicely dark, on my plate. So I'll go into that. bristles separate and give you some nice, I mean, you could do this with a number of different brushes, but the Hake brush, or Hake, however you want to pronounce it. I notice that some of the British people pronounce it Hake. But anyway, I think we need an Oriental person to tell us how to properly pronounce it. Okay, so there. And you can go to the side with it for some marks to the side also. But so there it is there. And I'm going to take that over here and go pretty dark and pretty strong over here. My plan all along was to do this area very strong. So I'm going to just go right to the raw umber violet. I don't know what the dogs are barking at, but everybody's inside. It's been such a rainy morning. And okay, now what I want to do is get a little darker color. Let me see, I have some here that I made with a little bit of, let's see if I can reconstitute this color here. It's got some ultramarine blue in it and some in the violet. I'm going to put some of that in the dish and put some of the hematite in the dish. See if I can get a darker color. Let's see if I can get a darker color for some of the work that I want to do here. Still not quite as dark as I'd like it to be. I'm going to have to do some more. Find something else to put in there that makes it darker. It's been put some of that dark color over here too, and the next step is I'm going to use my round brush, my synthetic round brush, to make some strong marks. I'm going to add a little more dark to this from my palette, because it's still not dark enough for what I need. Okay, so I've added a little bit of black to that, hoping that'll give me a little bit more bold color, because I'm going to go now and make some strong. It's still not dark enough. Well, I'll put some marks with that, and then I'll have to go a little bit darker. When I get my rigger out, I'll just use some straight dark violets or Payne's gray. But anyway, I'm just wanting to make some various marks in here. I'll make some initial ones and then come in with the final darkest marks. This is where the most exciting and kind of nerve-wracking part of the painting happens, when you're thinking, oh, am I totally ruining this painting that I like and that I've worked so hard on by doing this? But it's these final steps that make the difference, and they generally have to be fairly bold steps. In the foreground, because you've got stronger shapes in the foreground, and I'm going to put a little more dark shadow into that base there. A little more dark shadow now that I have that very dark color mixed. I'll put that there. With that same color, I'll use the rigger. I think I'll use not the 0 rigger, but maybe a little bit bigger rigger. Yeah, this one. Oh, this is a 0 rigger. Okay, I'll use that. And now I'll go in with the same color, but with some fine marks, fine grasses, and going in different directions. And some of them will have a little bit of, some of them might have a little bit of seeds on the end of them, you know, just like that. They don't have to be, you know, some of them could be little seed grasses. Some might be a little more reddish in color. And while this is very wet over here, this is a time that you can take the end of a brush and make some marks in the paint with the end of a paintbrush to scratch in some light marks. They make a huge difference in the painting. If it's very wet all around the marks, the paint might come back into them, but let's try to get some of those light colored grasses in there by doing this. And some more calligraphic marks to from this shoreline here in that very dark paint. I know, it's nerve-wracking. If I don't get this right and the rest of the painting is fine, then I'll have to come in with my scrubber and scrub out the bottom of the painting and try again. But I think it's looking like it's looking pretty close to what I was wanting it to look like, so that is good. How about that? Doesn't always happen that way. And since the lighter colors around it are, these marks are wet, it creates some nice diffusion here in this area. I'm really liking it. And I'll just take, you can also use a stick, by the way, or you can use a bamboo calligraphy pen. You can even use a chopstick to come in and make some of these marks. It's good to have a bunch of tools readily available, because some different things will have. This is a little wider than that other one, so it's making a different mark, a little wider mark. I'm cleaning the paint off the bottom. When you hear that noise, I'm putting it on the paper towel. Yeah, I think that's looking just about ready. I'm going to put some of the lighter reddish color on some more grasses here. Add a little bit of water to that, and some of them will be lighter still, so that they're not all dark. Going across the water. That's very nice. Little lighter ones here and there. It's just to give the sense of the wonderful grasses that are on this bit of land here. I don't think I really need more in that area. And I'm not convinced I need any more in this area. So I think that, other than this mark is a little too bright there, so I'll just reduce it a little bit. So I might do a little bit of swiggling here and there and in the on the ground, because not all the grasses will be standing up, so there'll be stuff going on. A lot of messy stuff going on in these kinds of areas. Okay, I do believe that this painting is probably done. I'll just take this and make it so it's not a big blob. Got a little carried away there. I'll just spread out some of that, and it's too much of a blob. Same over here, too much of a blob. Spread it out a little bit. Soften it a little bit. Okay. This painting is now done. I hope you enjoyed the process. I really do love experimenting and trying things out. Maybe I shouldn't do them on a video because I don't always get it right. But maybe the good thing in teaching in that way is that you get to see the things that work and the things that don't work, and you see me making my corrections and struggling with trying to get it right. So maybe that's good. It's hard to know. But thank you for joining me. I'm just going to lift this up a bit so you can see this foreground in that wonderful, wonderful texture. And over here, you see those white marks that the paintbrush handle and the chopstick have made. You see the white marks here, the wonderful scratch marks. And with those with the paintbrush handle and the chopstick and some of the other softer thing. See, it's not like using a razor and coming in and scratching later to get white marks. So this is a finished painting, and thank you very, very much for joining me in my studio. Have a wonderful day.